بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah, this is the last part of the program. What I'm going to do is I want to talk about the different understandings of riba, what it means to consume it, different applications, and the different scholarly opinions concerning mortgage. So I know Akhuna Jafar, he had asked about what that means and what that entails, and what are some conflicting opinions concerning a lot of the different financing organizations that are out there, and what the different scholars understand, and why people understand what it is that they do, and how to implement it, and whether or not in the types of mortgages that we as Muslims can be involved in. So the objective here is to answer the very fundamental question, and a very important question: can Muslims buy homes? Right. This is something that we all ask and something we always wonder about. Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair, Akhuna Abdullah, he gave this presentation concerning the realtor and what to look for in the market. And also we had Hussein, who gave us the idea and told us the importance of buying homes. So a lot of the discussion is going to revolve around this verse very specifically. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba adhafan mudha'afa wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun, that you who believe do not consume usurious interest doubled and redoubled. Be mindful of Allah so that you may prosper. So in this verse, there are a couple things that we need to focus on. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's use of Takulu, consumption. What does that mean? And secondly, riba. And I use the word riba very pointedly. There's a reason that I will focus on the use of this term, and you will not see me using the term interest, and you will not see me using the term usury. And there's a reason for that, because it's very important for us to understand why there are different opinions, and why different scholars view this in different ways, and why their understanding of riba is so different, and why certain scholars allow certain things, and why other scholars disallow certain things. So why focus on consumption? Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he focuses on those individuals who consume riba. Those individuals who consume it, those individuals who take advantage of others. Because you have two people, right? You have the oppressor and the oppressed. So if you want to talk about how an individual is dealt with in particular societies, and why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited riba? Because it is a system that leads to oppression. And if we understand that it is a system that leads to oppression, the person who benefits it is the oppressor. The oppressed do not benefit from a ribawi system. This is something that is really important to keep in mind. It is not going to be the oppressed that benefit from this. It is only going to be the oppressor. And how do we understand that? And why is that? Because if we look at the individual who is oppressed, why is he getting into a ribawi transaction? Why is he engaging in? Why would someone want to take money to give back more? What is in their benefit? Why would an individual voluntarily choose to do that? Because they have no choice. You'll find that even in the examples that we share from the Meccan period and the Medini period, that people had no choice. They're forced into these situations where they had to live on a line of credit. And because they had to live on this line of credit, the people who had wealth, what were they doing? They were taking advantage of those people who didn't have that same ability, who didn't have that financial power. And after exhausting all these other avenues, they're forced to take these loans. This person, just like all of us, they do not willingly want to be in these transactions. This is not something that they volunteer to be in. This is not something that, even if you look at it, leaving the spiritual aspect, just from the financial aspect, people don't want this type of transaction. It's not something that is good for someone to take money and to end up giving more back. The other thing is that it is not a system that helps him. The ribawi system is a system that is oppressive. It is a system that hurts. It is a system that is harmful. It is a system that supports a very few select group of people. It is not meant to be for the people who are financially destitute. So what if one engages willingly? Because you have people who do it willingly because they are looking for their own personal benefit. And they're only looking for an immediate benefit from it. So a person, even the scholars who say that these ribawi transactions with houses are not considered riba, even they would agree. It is not okay for me to take my Capital One card to go buy a 70-inch TV and pay 20% APR. Even they would agree that this is riba. So these are the type of people who the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is talking about, because these people have no basira. They don't care about what Allah made halal, and they don't care what about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made haram. And why is it that you have such stern ahadith? You have such stern statements from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he azza wa jal ahallallahu lahum al-bayt. He made permissible for them buying, but they still chose to. And again, this is by choice, not the people who are forced, but the people who choose to get involved in ribawi transactions. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Allah's messenger cursed the one who accepted riba and the one who paid it. Again, the one who paid it voluntarily, not the one who is forced to pay it. And in hadith Jabir radiallahu anhu, he said that Allah's messenger cursed the one who accepted riba, the one who paid it, the one who records it, the one who witnesses it, and he said they are all equal in Allah's eyes because they volunteered to get involved in this extraneous transaction. And again, we are not talking about the people who are forced into these situations. So there are three hadiths I want to share with you here, and I think this is an important point because some people will use them as a type of spiritual blackmail. And they'll say, like, look how harsh these hadiths are. Look how tough these hadiths are, talking about the one who engages riba. And I'm not here to lessen the sin of riba. That's not my goal. But we need to make sure that when we warn others, when we speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we speak about His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that we speak justly. From those hadiths that people use, a dirham of riba, which a man receives knowingly, is worse than committing adultery 36 times. This hadith, Ibn Hajar, he declares it weak in Tahdib al-Tahdib. This is not something we can use. It is not a hadith that we can use now to hurt others and use as spiritual blackmail toward others. Another one that is very famous, the dirham of riba, which a man receives knowingly, is worse than committing adultery 36 times. In the Hatim. The Hatim is the area, Maqam Ismail, with that area next to the Kaaba. Again, this hadith, guess what? It is also weak. Ibn al-Jawzi, he mentions it in his Mawdu'at, his book, which he collected fabricated narrations. The next hadith, again, also famous. Riba is of 70 different kinds, the least grave of it being equivalent to a man marrying his own mother. This hadith, guess what? Also weak. Ibn al-Jawzi, again, he mentions it in his fabricated narrations. This is not to lessen the harm of riba. This is not to say that riba is good. But when we speak about Allah and we speak about His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we have to speak with amana, we have to speak with trust. So what is riba? This is a very important question. Linguistically, in the language, in the Arabic language, it basically means increase. So any increase you would use in a linguistic sense, not in a Shari'i sense, to mean riba. Islamically, you have different opinions. So the Ahnaf, the Shafi'iyya, the Malikiyya, and the Hanabila, they have different definitions that they share concerning riba. The first one, any extra on return, even if following other Shari'i guidelines, placed conditionally by either party, guaranteeing an extra return. The Malikis and the Shafi'is say, an agreement on return with parameters that fall outside the Sharia at the time of agreement with a delay of payment or of assets. And lastly, the Hanabila, they say increase in specific assets. And we will see that these terms and these definitions will make a huge impact on how we understand and how we deal with riba. So why is it so bad? Why is riba such a problem? Why is it an issue? In Makkah, when the ribawi system that was in place, people would starve to death, literally, because of the system. In Makkah, another thing that would happen is that people would become slaves. Another thing that would happen is that out of fear, they would kill their daughters because they didn't want their daughters to become slaves. The other thing that happened is that it created an entire class of jobless people. This is the effect of it, that it destroys entire societies. It forces people to enter a life of slavery. It forces people to death. It forces people to hunger. This is what a true ribawi system looks like. And this is what very clearly and specifically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam warned from. There were no social programs to support these people. There was no layered network. There was no nets to catch any of them if they defaulted on their loans, if they were not able to pay these people back. So how was riba implemented? And here I want to share with you two verses that give us insight, give us understanding on what it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means when he talks about these ribawi transactions. The first of them, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا الرِّبَا أَضْعَافًا مُضَاعَفًا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. That you who believe do not consume riba, doubled and redoubled. Be mindful of Allah, have taqwa of Allah so that you may prosper. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, وَمَا آتَيْتُم مِّن رِبَا لِيَرْبُوا فِي أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ فَلَا يَرْبُوا عِندَ اللَّهِ وَمَا آتَيْتُم مِّنَ الزَّكَاةِ تُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ. From a close relative is much worse than stealing from a parent or from somebody who's poor. And the same thing applies to riba. Those small amounts, still ribawi, but they are not as harmful and not as haram as those that take these large amounts and completely destroy society. So does the same apply to fiat currency? Because during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we see very clearly discussions of dirham, discussions of dinar, discussions of gold, and discussions of silver. Do these discussions of gold and silver apply now to dollars and cents and euros and rupees? So an example, and I just want to share this with you for something for all of us to think about. If I borrowed 30 grams of gold 10 years ago, 30 grams of gold, I borrowed 10 years ago, how much will I owe you today? What do you guys think? Huh? This is 30 grams. In amount and in value, I will owe you 30 grams. Does anybody disagree with this? If I borrowed $10,000 10 years ago, how much would I owe you today? And this is where we're going to start having problems. How much should I give back to you? Huh? Inflation, ahsan. In amount, it would be 10,000, but the value would be what? 12. What happened? How come this is not like gold? Because these fiat currency is inflationary. Commodity currencies like gold and silver are not essentially inflationary assets. The price does not fluctuate. Gold against gold will never change. Silver against silver will never change. And some of us might say, well, $2,000, this is not a big deal, it's not a big amount, because we are privileged. We deal with the US dollar. Let me give you another example. If I borrowed 94,000 Pakistani rupees 10 years ago, how much would I owe today? What do you guys think? 94,000 rupees? It would actually be 176,000 rupees in value. This is what inflation, when it goes out of control, what happens to it. Like I said, we are privileged. We deal with the US dollar. But if you look at the Egyptian pound, look at the Lebanese lira, look at the Pakistani rupee, the difference in prices, this inflation isn't something that we as Muslims are supposed to take into account when we do these loans and when we do these transactions. You guys start seeing the problem now. It's not as black and white as some of us like to make it, some of us like to present. The next thing, here Ibn al-Qayyim, he mentions a very important point. He said concerning dirham and gold, وَأَمَّا الدَّرَاهِمُ وَالدِّنَانِيرُ فَقَالَ الطَّائِفَةُ الْعِلَّةُ فِيهَا كَوْنَهُمَا مَوْزُونَيْنِ وهذا مذهب أحمد في إحدى الروايتين عنه ومذهب أبي حنيفة وطائفة قال العلة فيهما الثمينة وهذا قول الشافعي والمالك وأحمد في الرواية الأخرى وهذا هو الصحيح بل الصواب. That concerning dirahim and dinanir, or gold and silver, a group of scholars say that the criteria is their weight. This is one opinion. This is the madhab of Ahmed in one narration and the madhab of Abu Hanifa. Another group of scholars said that the criteria is in their value. You guys see the difference? One group of scholars is saying it is on the value, and one group of scholars is saying it is based on the weight. How do we translate this today? That this is an issue of amount versus value. Just like when we were talking about gold, just like we were talking about silver, just like we were talking about dollars, just like we were talking about rupees, just like we were talking about dirham. That it is not as easy as sometimes we try to make it how we want to make it. The other issue that I want to talk about are riba, interest, and usury the same thing? No, okay? I agree, they're not the same thing. Riba, we've already defined. Interest, it is the monetary charge. It is a monetary charge, it is a legal term. Please be aware of this. For the privilege of borrowing money, typically expressed as an APR or an annual percentage rate. Can there be a relationship to this and the inflation rate? Yes. Second, usury, the practice of lending money and charging the borrower interest, especially at an exorbitant or illegally high rate. These three are different. Are they related? Yes, they are. I believe they are related. There's no doubt about that. The reason that riba and usury don't completely overlap is because riba, you can have ribawi transactions in assets. When you barter, you can have riba, but that doesn't necessarily apply to usury. Usury is specifically for money. Riba can be for more than money. It can apply to certain assets. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, he talked about selling dates for dates. He talked about selling grapes for grapes, or wheat for wheat, or barley for barley. And that's why usury doesn't completely overlap. And interest, sometimes there are different fees that are involved. There are processing fees. Those are considered interest. Transaction fees, these are considered interest. But those are not necessarily riba. Those are different charges that are done, and again, it is a legal term that covers an umbrella of different ideas. So here, the ulama, they use something. This is a very important qaida, or a very important principle, la mashahid fil istibah. That in the Arabic language, when the scholars, when the fuqaha, when the jurists, when they deal with certain issues, they use certain terms. But they themselves say, it is less important on the term that we use, and it's more important on the, what do you guys think? On the hukum, on the ruling. You can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it doesn't concern me if you call it interest or profit or pork or alcohol. What is the ruling on this item in my hands? That is what matters. And that's what the scholars say here. So when it comes to rulings, these can be very clear. But when it comes to wording, and if this is in Arabic, what about when we translate terms? It creates another layer of problems and another layer of issues. The next thing I want to talk about is, can I buy a home on mortgage, right? This is the reason that we all came. This is the question that we all want to answer. Some scholars will say, no, you can't. They'll say that you have a viable option, you have a viable alternative to renting. This is their answer. Why? Because riba is haram, and to them, riba is any type of increase. It doesn't, for them, it's not the value, it is the amount. And it's very clear on why they have this opinion. Some scholars will say, yes, you can. The question is, how? Some of them will say, Islamic financing. So we have organizations like Guidance, we have organizations like UIF, we have organizations like La Riba, etc. And even those, there's levels. So I would say the ones that probably have the most approval from Amjad are number one, Guidance, and number two, UIF. And then the other ones, they're still under investigation. And even those, they say that it is okay to utilize these organizations because they are the best of the worst. They're better than regular banks. They fulfill more criteria. So if there are 10 criteria to a good transaction, these organizations, they fulfill 7 of them. but banks fulfill 0 or 1 or 2. So they'll say choose this because it's still better when comparing. And then you have some scholars who will say this is a sound alternative. So we have like Mufti Taqi Uthmani, and we have a number of other scholars who sit on the Sharia board for guidance who say this is fine. This is a completely reasonable way to purchase. And then you have other scholars who say it's okay to go through conventional banking. And there are 2 reasons that they say this. One reason is that it is a concession. There is a need. There's sometimes people have 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. It's very difficult to rent. It's very costly. It is difficult for us to establish ourselves. There is no long-term in the countries that we are coming from, and we want to establish ourselves here and make a way for ourselves here, and this is the only way to do it. So what do you do as a concession out of need? So out of need, it is okay to utilize this conventional banking, and then you have other scholars who say that it's not riba. As long as the APR or the finance rate is less than the inflation rate, then these scholars will say it is okay, and we'll talk about some of the reasons of why they say this. Because there are 2 important issues here that are important as well. Over here, these scholars, they talk about no need, right? So over here you have need, over here you have need, and over here you have need. All of them use darura. All of them use the same reasoning. All of them have the same mechanics in their fatwa. Why? Need can be understood one way, life or death. So if I don't buy a house, am I going to die? No, most of us won't, if not all of us. The other way to understand it is to link it to maqasid al-Sharia. What are maqasid al-Sharia? That Islam came to preserve certain goals. It came to preserve certain ideals. What are those ideals? Life, wealth, religion, intellect, and family. So out of these 5, the first group, the ones that say it's haram, they limit need to this. The other scholars, where do they put the need? Family, wealth. They say it is a preservation of wealth. And because it is better to preserve your wealth than to give it to these different institutions, than to give it to a landlord, than to live under somebody else's control, that you have your own independence because Islam came to give freedom, it is better to utilize this. The second point, inshallah, I'll take questions at the end. So if you guys do have any questions, just please take note of them. I know, because I might answer the question that you have as I'm coming, and then inshallah we can come back to it. So those scholars who say that it is not riba, why do they say that? We said number 1, they said that this system is actually empowering. When an individual goes to purchase a home, if he can't pay, he can default on the home, he can declare bankruptcy. Will he be sold into slavery? No. Certain assets will not be gone after. There are certain things that will be erased. There are a number of safety nets. There are financial safety nets that are in place that actually protect the person and are a means of empowering. Does this extend to general loans, and to banking loans, and to business loans? That's a discussion for another time. And inshallah, we hope to continue this financial series in the future. But concerning this, they say that this, to purchase a home, is actually a way to empower the person, and there are enough safeties there that it is a way to empower them. Secondly, they say that because of inflation, you have to look at the inflation rate versus the interest rate. And if the inflation rate is higher than the interest rate, then it is permissible because technically you are not returning the same value. You're returning less. And someone might ask, why would a bank give free money? It's a valid question, right? Why would a bank give free money? If inflation this year is at 7%, why would a bank give a loan at 2.75? Because it's free money for them. The federal government is going to insure every single loan that they give. They just need somebody who's going to secure it. And lastly, appraisal. Every time I buy a house, the moment I buy the house, in general, not in every case, but the moment I buy a house, within 2 weeks, what happens to the value of the house? It goes up. So these 2 factors, they say that this actually works against the interest rate. And because these 2 factors work against it, these reasons, as a whole, in addition to this, are a means, and a legal means, to utilize in taking this type of loan. So again, the question, which option do I choose? Do I continue renting? Do I go to guidance? Do I go to a conventional bank? That's the question we all have. You have to trust your heart. I can't dictate to you which one is right. And I'm not going to make it easy for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask you. He's not going to ask me. And you have to make that decision. And each of us needs to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, comfortable with the decision that we've made, especially when you make an investment like this. That's for us, that's for our family, and sometimes even for the community. The only thing that I hope and I pray, and this is something I want to close with, is that don't look down at a person who makes a different decision than you. If Ahmed decides to go with conventional banking, it doesn't make him better or worse than Khalid who decides to go with Islamic banking. We are all going to have different levels of comfort. We're all our talaya mukhtalifa. All of our natures are different. We can't force our opinions on others. We can't look down on others. And someone will be comfortable with Islamic financing for that reason. Someone will be comfortable with conventional banking for that reason. And some people will be conventional, but they'll be comfortable with renting for that reason. Because at the end of the day, all of our paths to Jannah, they're going to be different. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help the person who believes that he is right. He will. He promises us. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. So whatever path that we decide to take, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq, to bless us, to give us guidance, maybe not the financial, but to bless this jama'ah. And I ask and I close and I pray to Him Azza wa Jalla that He gathers up in His paradise just like He's gathered us up today. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب خطيئة إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
Brothers and sisters, before you leave, we need your help in folding the chairs and the tables and cleaning the courtyard. So don't leave very quickly. Just give us a few more minutes and clean this courtyard. So just fold the table, folding the chairs.
I have a question regarding